Warning: this episode talks about suicidal ideations and addiction. This may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Everybody has experienced pain. It could be a dull ache, it could be a sharp stabbing feeling, but imagine the kind of acute, deep seated pain that's not only hard to explain, but it never goes away.
It was getting to a point which is quite frustrating because the patient would come back to you time and time again. You try something else and it wouldn't work for them.
For this episode, we talk about pain management, about bringing medicinal cannabis into the wider sphere of pain relief, with Cannadoc co-founders Dr. David Feng and Kevin Brabazon. David is Cannadoc's medical director, and Kevin is the director of operations. I also spoke to Dean Tabone. He has had a C4 spinal cord injury for the past 33 years and has been on his own journey for the past 16 years to fight his ever-increasing chronic pain.
Yeah, well, how did it start exactly? Well, I think I went to, maybe it was back in early 2019, I went to, a hemp expo in Melbourne here at the Expo Center. I think I talked to some people who had used medicinal cannabis and they were saying, what great results they were having. Yeah, I was friends with David and created this website called Cannadoc. I showed it to David. And then I think, David, you were actually at that time just discovering medicinal cannabis yourself, weren't you? And I think you had a really good response with one of your patients. And I guess the stars had just aligned there.
I'd been in general practice for almost a decade, and I'd been seeing a number of patients with chronic health conditions that weren't responding to traditional therapies. And it was getting to a point which is quite frustrating because the patient would come back to you time and time again. You try something else and it wouldn't work for them. And, the very first patient we tried it on, or I tried it on before we started Cannadoc, was after Kevin had suggested the idea about medicinal cannabis to me, because I didn't have any idea about medicinal cannabis and I didn't know how to prescribe it, how to access it for the patient, and didn't really know the therapeutic benefits of it. So when this patient came to me, and I'd been seeing her for a number of years before this, and she was at the end of her tether. Basically, she told me that, look, I'm 77 now. I've tried everything under the sun for my chronic back pain, my fibromyalgia, my peripheral neuropathic pain, and nothing was working. And I almost felt like the medical system had failed her. And so I decided to investigate a little bit further on Kevin's advice to look into medicinal cannabis a bit more, did some research, and then got back to this patient to try medicinal cannabis for them. And we only actually just tried CBD, which is very, very safe generally. And she had an amazing response. Basically, her pain went from a 9 out of 10 to a 1 out of 10 within 3 weeks. Phenomenal stuff. She had zero side effects and it basically absolutely changed her life.
You were originally prescribing people, I guess, prescription pain medication, unfamiliar with the concept, but also CBD. What is the difference between CBD and medicinal cannabis?
Yeah, so I guess when we talk about medicinal cannabis, we talk about the overarching cluster of different medications that the cannabis plant can produce. And there are well over 100 cannabinoids in medicinal cannabis that have therapeutic benefits.
Cannabinoids are compounds found in cannabis. You may be familiar with the most popular cannabinoid. Now let me try and get this right. Phytocannabinoid tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which is the primary psychoactive found in cannabis.
So when we talk about medicinal cannabis, we talk about the whole cluster of medications that we can derive from one plant. And when we talk about CBD is actually just one cannabinoid that's derived from medicinal cannabis. When we talk about medicinal cannabis from a pharmaceutical perspective, we tend to only talk about it in terms of CBD and THC. The reason for that is THC is the most prevalent cannabinoid in the cannabis plant, and then CBD is the next most prevalent. So we tend to only talk about those two. But as we learn more and more about this plant, we learn more and more about these other minor cannabinoids, we're going to find that there are sort of exceedingly good benefits from these other compounds as well.
So when people might be unfamiliar with medicinal cannabis and might have some reservations, a lot of people might think that it is on par with recreational use of marijuana. What do you say to that?
That's one of the biggest hurdles that people have to get over in their minds. We know medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis are very, very different things. When we talk about recreational cannabis, most people use it in its high THC form, and some people enjoy that. Medicinal cannabis, on the other hand, the goal of medicinal cannabis is trying to achieve therapeutic outcomes like pain relief, reduction in anxiety, improving sleep, that sort of thing, without causing a high. We can sometimes use products that contain THC in medicinal cannabis, but if we get people high, actually we're doing something wrong, okay? Because we hope to achieve a threshold of therapeutic improvement before we get someone to that euphoria stage.
Which can be a huge issue. I mean, was your patient, the 77-year-old lady, was she also a spinal cord injury patient, or was this somebody who just had chronic pain?
Yeah, this was the very first patient I'd seen for medicinal cannabis, and she didn't have a spinal cord injury. She did have neuropathic pain, though. She'd had a peripheral neuropathy of unknown origin, basically. Essentially, she'd gone 30 years or so with this burning nerve pain in her hands and feet, and she'd done every investigation under the sun. She's seen multiple neurologists. She's nerve conduction tests. She's done all sorts of scans and things like that, and no diagnosis was made. But essentially, she's got this severe pain in her hands and feet. Tended to be worse at nighttime and kept her from sleeping, and just made her essentially very depressed. And actually, she got it made her suicidal after a few decades, which is very common. We see that a lot. Wears people down mentally and physically, and causes severe depression as well. Definitely had symptoms similar to patients who have suffered spinal cord injury.
Because a lot of our listeners who will be listening to this is majority spinal cord injury, or family or friends of people who know somebody with a spinal cord injury and probably understand the levels of pain. And because medicinal cannabis is so new to the market, prescription medication has been prescribed for so long. What gaps in Australian medicine do you feel were there that aren't meeting patient needs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The biggest thing that I feel like medicinal cannabis is doing for patients is it's actually activating many different areas of therapeutic effects rather than just a one. Say if you take opiate medication, your morphine, your fentanyl, tramadol, codeine, whatever, they tend to only activate one set of receptors in the brain and the central nervous system. So it's not a very holistic medicine. You're targeting one area to try and dampen down nerve signals or the perception of nerve signals in the brain. You're hitting it really, really hard with a lot of intensity. When you do that, you tend to get a lot of side effects from it. So as we all know, opiates can cause sedation, constipation. It can cause dependency. People tend to become more and more tolerant to it, and you need higher and higher doses as well. And then down the track, you may get addiction potentials. So that's just opiates for one example, but there are other medications that we use for say chronic neuropathic pain that also tend to only hit sort of one set of receptors and don't really have that holistic approach to medicine. They tend to create a lot of side effects. From my experience, and this is just what I've seen, is that the therapeutic range for medicinal cannabis is very good. So most patients do get some sort of benefit from medicinal cannabis, and the side effect profile is much better compared to, say, opiates or benzodiazepines, nerve pain medications, that sort of class of medication. So I've not yet encountered a better class of medications from a benefit to risk reward ratio. We deal with a lot of chronic pain medications that have very, very high risk of developing side effects and sometimes toxicity as well. So we know that there's a bit of an opiate crisis across the world. And that's kind of hitting Australian shores as well. A lot of people unfortunately die of pharmaceutical overdoses when it comes to particularly opiates. And a lot of these, a large proportion of these are from patients getting prescription-based medication. It's unfortunate, but the medical fraternity has to take some responsibility for this as well. That we're getting patients using medications that essentially isn't always the best medication for them from a pain perspective, because constantly knocking on just the one receptor, most people are bound to develop dependency and tolerance to these medications over time. In contrast from those traditional therapies to medicinal cannabis tends to work on multiple different areas of the body, targeting mainly the endocannabinoid system. So if you activate those receptors in a whole bunch of areas in the body, you're going to get a whole host of different therapeutic benefits, like reducing pain, reducing inflammation, reducing anxiety. People tend to sleep better with medicinal cannabis. They generally feel a little bit better in themselves as well. And the safety profile is actually very good for medicinal cannabis. You can't actually cause someone to take a lethal overdose with medicinal cannabis. This has never happened before from a direct overdose of cannabis. I mean, yes, surely you can make them feel a bit unwell from the side effects, but you can't actually induce a lethal dose. I have to say, I don't want to come across as spruiking this medication. Obviously, I've done my research. I have to say that it doesn't work for everybody. Okay, like just with any medication doesn't mean like one size fits all for everybody. It needs careful titration. You need to find the right concentrations of THC or CBD or other cannabinoids out there that might be beneficial for the patient. So it doesn't work for everybody, but for the people it works for, they tend to get very, very good benefits.
Yeah, and that's very interesting considering the criticisms that can come with people who are unfamiliar with the concept of medicinal cannabis. One man in this virtual room who's been silent for quite a long time, Dean, is one of your patients who's had success with it. So, Dean, do you want to give us a bit of background on your disability and how pain had affected your life?
Yeah, I've been C4 quadriplegic now for 33 years coming January. Became a C4 quad at the age of 13 after falling off a suspension bridge. I've had a fair bit of pain, more so in the last, I'd say, 15, 16 years of my disability. And I had been, David mentioned one of the opioids that he mentioned, tramadol. I've been on tramadol for 16 years. Yeah, had been told by my GP that I had to basically stop them because of the high suicide rate that was happening and with the opioids and so forth, like David also mentioned, and that they were coming under a different category. Yeah, it was a lot harder to get tramadols and so forth, and I'd had to see his pain specialist, and it was going to be a lot harder. And I mentioned the medicinal cannabis to my GP, and he said, it's something you can try, and which we did, and here we are today. I was on quite a high dose. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe the maximum dosage for tramadol is 400 milligrams per day. I was on 300 per day for 16 years. I slowly weaned off that, and I'm not taking any tramadol at all, and haven't been for quite a few months now, since I've been on the medicinal cannabis. Yeah.
When you're approaching pain management and you said you were taking it for 16 years, could you just describe the type of pain that you were in, just so our listeners get a better idea about what chronic pain means to you?
With me being a C4 complete, C5 incomplete quad, with my pain it acts very different because I can't actually say I'm in pain per se in my lower back. I can't feel that pain, if you will. However, my body does respond in a different manner, and I'll get like really, really bad muscle spasms in the abdomen, in the legs, to the point you can't even go out, because if you do go out, you're gonna slide out your wheelchair. Carers need to slide you back and so forth, especially if you can't do it yourself, like in my case. And then you've got issues with profuse sweating, and that's the one thing that I just couldn't stand, just feeling uncomfortable, always cold, no matter what the temperature was outside. Even though the pain might be coming from my lower back, pelvis, or wherever, I don't feel that pain per se. However, the body does react in a different way, letting me know that there's something wrong somewhere else.
And I think that's something that people need to consider when they're talking about pain management, because pain is actually a life ruiner for a lot of people. Can affect actually everything in your life. So I guess for you, Dean, when you're unable to go outside because you might spasm or the profuse sweating or feeling cold as a result of the pain, it really puts a dent in everything.
Oh, without a doubt, the quality of life just becomes basically non-existent. I mean, I'm still learning. I've only been on it for a relatively short time, so I'm still learning. And like David said, it does take time. You know what's right for you. And the amazing thing is too that I find is, with the medical cannabis, even with a high THC content, I don't get that head high. It's more a body high, if you will, or just relaxes the body, so the spasms stop within 1 to 2 minutes. It's unbelievable.
So I guess this is what you're talking about, David, when you say that the effects actually are unique to everybody.
Exactly. So we know that there are multiple different formulations out there. We know, formulations that are ingested, like oils or capsules and things like that. They tend to be longer lasting, but they have slow onset of action. For people with sort of a lot of chronic pain or chronic symptoms throughout the day, we'd probably prefer to use an oil or a capsule just to get that sort of slow relief. Most patients will get about, on average 6 to 8, maybe 8 to 10 hours of relief per dose, but it takes about 30 to 90 minutes to start working. If you're, someone who needs relief quite quickly, so you get acute muscle spasms like Dean would get, or if you get like acute on chronic migraines, then you may want to use some fast acting like a flower. If you were to vaporize a flower through a special device, medical device called a vaporizer, then your onset of action is much faster. You get an onset of action within 1 to 3 minutes sort of thing, and maximum benefits by about 15 minutes. Dean is in a unique position. He's tried both. He's probably someone who might be able to speak of, the different effects of when he took the oil versus when he took the flower as well.
With the oil, I did find it did last a lot longer. However, it did take for me, it took about 60 to 90 minutes before it actually kicked in. I found it very dry. I was getting dry in the mouth, but it did work for me. In the evening, I found just still sweating. So when I was having the vape, that stopped that, eliminated that pretty much, straight away.
So previous to you, I mean, you've spoken about talking about it with your doctor and using it as a trial method, but was there any doubts before you started using it as to maybe the effectiveness or anything like that?
Because I went off the tramadol, obviously there was. I'd been on it for 16 years. I know what it's like when I've just missed one tablet, let alone coming off 2 of them every day. If I just missed one, the muscle spasms that you get are just violent and really, really bad. Coming off the tramadol was pretty bad for me. I mean, it takes you in a pretty dark place. Yeah, it's a weird. I'm pretty upbeat, upgoing, and I joke around. I muck around quite a bit. But when I was coming off the tramadol, pretty dark for a good 3-4 weeks. You do get those thoughts, like suicidal thoughts and things like that, because I think your body's craving. Well, you're craving the opioids, and like in my case, I was at quite a high dose. But with the medicinal, whether it's oil or the flower, they're the only 2 I can speak of. But whatever it is for the spasm, it's just where the flower works in literally within 1 to 2 minutes. The muscle spasm stops within 1 to 2 minutes. Now, we're baclofen and things like that. I mean, it obviously takes time. It will take a good half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And it still doesn't take the spasm away to the point that the medicinal cannabis does. That's what I find to be a game changer in regards to muscle spasm with cannabis. I just think it's a no-brainer, to be quite honest. I can't speak for everyone, but yeah, I've known a few people with spinal cord injuries, and yeah, they've said the same thing. I used to sleep probably on average 3 to 4 hours a night, and I do use the sleep app machine. Now, I average probably around 6 to 7 hours.
Chronic pain also, like you said earlier, Dean, it came with dark suicidal, I guess, depression thoughts. And I guess the lack of sleep did not help, while you were not only just coming off it, but as I can gather that you've been having 3 to 4 hours of sleep for the entire time you've had chronic pain? 16
years probably, yes. Once I did have the surgery on my neck where they had to remove 3 to 4 vertebrae and put a titanium cage in. That's when they put me on the tramadol. The best way to explain it, in my case, I would say that I found it sort of masks the pain, if that makes sense. It does the job, but it doesn't do the job properly.
Obviously, I'm part of the medical fraternity, and we try and do a really good job of vetting medications. We want really good scientific literature about each medication we give to our patients, making sure, obviously, first we do no harm to the patient, making sure it's safe, and then making sure it's it's actually effective in what we want it to do. And all medications have to go through a very stringent process of testing, investigations, clinical trials before we say yes, definitively safe and definitively works better than just say a placebo. That's a very, very good system in place, but unfortunately it's very slow as well. So medications take many years, sometimes decades, to come online before discovery of the medication to actually getting it onto the pharmacy shelves. And that can be exceedingly frustrating. When we're talking about medicinal cannabis, this is a medication that's been illegal for many countries through most of the world for over 100 years. For whatever reason, I don't want to talk about that today too much, but there's probably a lot of political lobbying going on in the background that's stopped medicinal cannabis becoming a mainstream product for the last 100 years or so across many countries. And only in recent times are countries and governments starting to realize that there is some benefit to be had here. I mean, humanity's actually known this for thousands and thousands of years. Humans have actually used medicinal cannabis for over 5,000 years. I think the Chinese were documented to use it as a medical, as a medicine rather than to get high on. And in over thousands of years, humans have actually cultivated this plant to contain all of these therapeutic compounds in it, these cannabinoids and terpenes in it. And so it's not actually by accident that we've just come across this plant. We've over many years, many millennia, cultivated this into such a fantastic compound or set of compounds, and to just forget about all of that in the space of, say, 3 generations is a little bit tragic in my mind. And not to teach it in med school. And, I mean, when I went through med school, nobody taught me about the endocannabinoid system. Nobody taught me about cannabis aside from addiction, cannabis addiction, how to treat. And that's quite sad, actually, because we've gone through generations and generations where people have missed out on a very useful therapy. And so this is a roundabout way of saying, basically, we don't have those large clinical RCTs, randomized controlled trials that say, yes, for sure, this is definitely 100% certain that this is definitely better than this other medication, head-to-head type of thing. And because these trials can cost tens of millions, if not more, to run, and can be extremely time consuming. There isn't that much incentive to run these large scale RCTs. And there hasn't been much time to do it, because only in recent times has there been a handful of countries across the world that decided that to allow the use of medicinal cannabis legally.
Considering prescription pain medication is a bit of a go-to for people, obviously in Dean's case and many others who are looking for solutions, why do you think there isn't more discussion around medication addiction, medication long-term side effects? Dean obviously hasn't slept properly for 16 years up until he started using medicinal cannabis. Why do you think this isn't really something people want to talk about?
It's what's the right way of putting it? There are some doctors who are very open-minded and willing to look into the evidence and do their own research, and welcome being guided into this basically a new frontier. Well, it's new, but it's essentially old. It's new to everybody it's new to our generation, but for that, like I said, thousands of years ago, doctors were prescribing this stuff for many generations. So it's new, and some doctors, which tend to be the slightly younger doctors, are more open-minded about this stuff. And hoping to are willing to give it a shot. And then there are some certain doctors who say, no, there's still not enough evidence, or they quote some of the stigma that gets constantly quoted to say they don't want to prescribe it, which is fair enough. I mean, it's with any sort of new medicine or technology, there are going to be people who are skeptical. We completely understand where they're coming from as well. So the only way to reduce the stigma and the skepticism is to educate. Do these podcasts, we run webinars to patients, to doctors, just to help educate them and to get them to think about alternative sources of therapies for their patients. Don't rule something out.
I mean, if somebody, for example, someone's only just heard about medicinal cannabis, let's just say it's from this podcast, something else. They heard about you, they're like, we want to hit you up. What is the consultation process when it comes to people who are interested in exploring medicinal cannabis? My
personal preference is if patients can have a quick chat with their doctor and have a talk to them about whether they feel like they're okay to use medicinal cannabis. I always like to get the patient's usual specialist or GP involved in the care, so to provide holistic care to the patient. I don't like to just see the patient just one time and just write a script without sort of justification. I think having the doctor's approval is good. It's not absolutely essential, but we would like to get the patient's summary and maybe even a referral. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. They can call us up, and then the doctor will go through all the ins and outs of what medicinal cannabis is, how it works, what might be suitable for them, or if it may be suitable for them at all. There's quite a lot of bureaucratic tape that you got to get through from an administration perspective, but we basically sort of handle all of that paperwork and help the patients out as best as we can.
Oh, I was just going to add to what David was saying. With the paperwork and whatnot in Australia, medicinal cannabis is not considered a frontline treatment or a frontline therapy. So there is a bit of a qualification process there. The patient would have needed to have tried standard medicine first, and then we can access the medicinal cannabis permits, therapeutic goods administration.
So, I mean, I know that you guys, both Kevin and yourself, have only had, it just seems like this company is so new, like 2019 new. And so what do you think that the future, no, that's not the right question. Let me start that again. Where do you see the future of medicinal cannabis in Australia? Do you see it being more widely accepted in a shorter term, or do you see this still being like a bit of a mountain to climb?
I think it's growing. One of the biggest, I guess, hurdles that we're dealing with now is, the public awareness of medicinal cannabis. We'll have a number of patients call us up and they say like, wow, we were just on your website, or we saw it on the news and we didn't even know this was legal. I would say like maybe the majority of the public just aren't, aware of it and how to access it. Yeah, from the practice perspective, we're gaining more and more patients every month, and we've been really busy, and we're really thankful for that, especially during COVID when other businesses have been impacted. So yeah, I think it's it's on an upward trajectory, and mainly due to the fact that this form of alternative medicine is helping a lot of people. Again, like David said, it doesn't work for everyone, but there are some great results that we're seeing, and as people become more and more aware of it, hopefully it just continues to grow.
So if people want to find you and they want to look to you, where would you want to send them to? Where's your address, email, phone number?
Yeah, they can go to cannadoc.com.au, cannadoc.com.au, or just Google Dr. David Feng, will come right up there. And the phone number, if they want to give us a call, it's 1-300-944-033.
If you have been triggered by discussions surrounding suicide in this episode, we encourage you to please contact Lifeline Australia's 24-hour crisis support service. You can contact them on 131114. You've been listening to Have the Nerve, a podcast by Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. If you would like to know more about what we've discussed in this episode, please check the show notes for details and visit SCIA.org.au for more information. We would love to continue the conversation. If you have anything you would like to ask, drop us a comment on our forum at scia.org.au/forum or email us at community@scia.org.au. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, please consider giving us a 5-star review. Your review will help us get the word out there. And finally, we're also on social media. You can find Spinal Cord Injuries Australia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you for listening.